Snow had fallen heavily through the night, leaving our small New England town wrapped in a pristine white blanket. I stood by the frost-covered window, a steaming mug of tea warming my hands, watching the early January light cast a soft glow over the streets. The stillness outside was calming, almost sacred, a reminder of the quiet that had settled into parts of my life since Paul left. My ex-husband, Sam, my son, had only been 4 when Paul packed his bags and walked away, leaving us to carve out a new life together. It hadn't been easy, but Sam and I managed. He became my anchor, my greatest source of joy. Now 21, Sam was growing into his own, a budding photographer with dreams that often felt too big for this little town. The sound of footsteps coming down the stairs pulled me from my thoughts. They were steady and confident, reflecting the self-assurance Sam carried these days. When he appeared in the kitchen, dressed in a knit sweater and jeans with his camera slung over his shoulder, his face lit up with a smile that could melt even the coldest January morning. "Good morning, Mom," he greeted, leaning in to kiss my cheek. The faint stubble of his beard brushed my skin, a small reminder of how much he'd grown. "Morning, sweetheart," I replied, setting my mug down. "Where are you off to so early?" "The lake," he said, his voice alive with excitement. "The light's perfect after a snowfall like this. I'll be back before lunch." "Be careful," I called after him as he grabbed his coat and boots. He waved, already halfway out the door. The house felt quieter once he left. I glanced around the kitchen. Its worn countertops and mismatched chairs were a testament to years of use. This house had been our sanctuary, a place where Sam and I rebuilt our lives. But lately, it felt too big, too empty. I missed the noise, the chaos of having a young child around. Now, it was just me most of the time, with Sam spending more hours chasing his dreams and less time at home. I sighed, rinsing out my mug and wiping the counter. The day stretched ahead, unplanned and uneventful. Outside, the snow glistened under the pale sun, inviting me to step out. Maybe a walk would do me some good, clear my head, shake off the monotony. I bundled up, slipping on my boots and wrapping a scarf around my neck. The air was sharp and crisp as I stepped onto the front porch. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional crunch of snow underfoot or the distant hum of a car engine. I let my feet guide me, wandering past familiar houses and shops, each one holding its own set of memories. Turning a corner, I spotted a small coffee shop, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. It had been years since I'd stopped in. On a whim, I pushed the door open, the scent of roasted beans and cinnamon immediately wrapping around me. The place was just as I remembered, cozy and unpretentious, with mismatched furniture and soft jazz playing in the background. I ordered a coffee and found a seat by the window, letting the heat from the mug seep into my hands. As I sipped, my thoughts drifted back to Paul. I rarely let myself think of him these days, but something about mornings like this made it harder to push the memories away. He had a way of making everything seem lighter, more exciting, until he didn't. The weight of his absence had been crushing at first, but over time, I'd learned to carry it. The bell above the door jingled, pulling me from my reverie. I glanced up, and my breath caught for a moment. It was John. I hadn't seen him in years. He was one of Paul's old friends, a fixture at our house during barbecues and game nights. Back then, he'd been just another face in the crowd, polite, unassuming, always with a kind word. Now, he seemed different. His hair was flecked with gray, his face more weathered, but there was something about the way he carried himself that caught my attention. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, his smile broadening as he approached. "Is that really you?" I managed a smile, gesturing to the seat across from me. "Hi, John. Long time no see." He sat down, shedding his coat and gloves. "You look great. It's been, 10 years?" "Something like that," I said, my voice lighter than I felt. "What brings you back here?" "Work," he replied, running a hand through his hair. "And maybe a bit of nostalgia. This place hasn't changed much, huh?" "Not a bit." We fell into easy conversation, reminiscing about the past and exchanging updates about our lives. There was a warmth to his presence, a steadiness I hadn't realized I'd missed. As he spoke, I found myself laughing, something I hadn't done so freely in a long time. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated, his gaze lingering. It was good seeing you, he said. Maybe we could catch up again sometime? I nodded, my pulse quickening in a way that surprised me. I'd like that. As I watched him walk away, a flicker of something unfamiliar stirred within me. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel so heavy. The snow had started again by the time I made my way back home. Fat, lazy flakes swirled through the air, settling softly on my coat and scarf. The streets were still quiet, with only a few tire tracks cutting through the smooth blanket of white. As I walked, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation with John in my head. His laugh, his smile, the way he seemed so at ease in his own skin. It felt different. And that difference lingered. Back home, the warmth of the house was welcoming, but my thoughts were restless. I busied myself with small tasks, tidying the living room, folding laundry, anything to distract myself. Yet, every time I paused, my mind drifted back to that coffee shop. By evening, the snowstorm had picked up, the wind howling against the windows. I was curled up on the couch with a book when my phone buzzed. I reached for it, expecting a message from Sam, but my chest tightened when I saw John's name. John, it was really nice seeing you today. I hope this isn't too forward, but I'd love to grab coffee again. Maybe this weekend? I stared at the screen, my heart beating a little faster. Part of me hesitated. It felt like stepping into something new, something unexpected. But another part of me, a quieter, braver part, whispered, why not? That sounds nice. Let's plan on it. I hit send before I could overthink it. The reply came quickly. Perfect. I'll pick a place and let you know. Stay warm tonight. The exchange was brief, but it left me with a strange sense of anticipation. I set the phone down and leaned back, letting the quiet of the house envelop me. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of excitement, a reminder that life, even in its stillest moments, could surprise you. Saturday arrived with an unusual brightness, the sun reflecting off the snow-covered streets. I spent the morning pacing the house, unable to shake the nerves that had settled in. It had been years since I'd gone out like this, and the thought of meeting John felt surreal. I reminded myself it was just coffee, nothing more, but even that didn't stop the flutter in my chest. I finally settled on a simple sweater and jeans, something casual but presentable. As I wrapped a scarf around my neck and grabbed my coat, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. There was a lightness in my expression I hadn't seen in a long time. The coffee shop John had chosen was a small, tucked-away place on the edge of town. When I arrived, he was already there, waiting by the window with 2 steaming mugs in front of him. He stood when he saw me, his smile warm and inviting. Hey, he said, pulling out a chair for me. You look great. Thanks, I said, sitting down. This place is nice. I've never been here before. I figured it might be a good spot, he said. Quiet, away from the usual crowd. Our conversation started easily, flowing from one topic to another. We talked about everything, his work, my life since Paul, and even Sam's photography. John had a way of listening that made me feel seen, truly seen, in a way I hadn't felt in years. As the minutes turned into hours, the walls I'd built around myself began to feel less necessary. At some point, the conversation shifted. He asked about Paul, his tone careful but curious. I hesitated, unsure of how much to share. It wasn't easy, I admitted. But we've moved on, Sam and I. It's just different, you know? Building a life from scratch. John nodded, his expression thoughtful. I always wondered what happened. He never talked about it much. He wasn't one to dwell on things, I said, a hint of bitterness creeping into my voice. But enough about him. How about you? Have you? He smiled, shaking his head. No, nothing serious. Life just kept moving, I guess. It's strange, isn't it? How things change, how people drift. There was a pause, the kind that felt heavy with unspoken words. For the first time, I noticed how close we were sitting, how his hand rested on the table just inches from mine. The air between us felt charged, and I wasn't sure if it was excitement or fear that made my pulse quicken. When we finally left the coffee shop, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. John walked me to my car, his presence steady and comforting. As I reached for the door handle, he hesitated. "I'm glad we did this," he said, his voice quiet. "Me too," I replied, meeting his gaze. For a moment, it felt like time stopped. Then, before I could think too much about it, he leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to my cheek. It was brief, almost innocent, but it sent a warmth through me I hadn't expected. "Good night," he said, stepping back. "Good night," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. As I drove home, my thoughts were a whirlwind. Lines I thought were clear had begun to blur, and I wasn't sure where this path would lead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. The next few days passed in a haze of anticipation and uncertainty. I tried to focus on my usual routines, grocery shopping, work, and catching up with Sam whenever he was home, but my thoughts kept drifting back to John. There was a pull I couldn't ignore, a sense that something significant was shifting within me. By Wednesday evening, I'd all but given up on getting anything done. I was curled up on the couch with a glass of wine when my phone buzzed. It was John. "Any plans tomorrow evening?" I thought about our conversation and realized there's something I'd really like to share with you. My stomach flipped as I read the message. There was no mistaking the tone, this wasn't just about coffee or reminiscing. "I'm free." "What did you have in mind?" His reply came quickly. "Come by my place. It's nothing fancy, but I've got a bottle of wine and a story or two I think you'd enjoy." I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. This was a step further, a line I hadn't crossed in years. But the part of me that had come alive in his presence, the part that yearned for connection, urged me forward. "I'd like that. Send me your address." The next evening, I found myself standing on John's porch, the cold January air biting at my cheeks. He opened the door almost immediately, his warm smile easing my nerves. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. His home was modest but inviting, with soft lighting and a faint scent of cedar lingering in the air. We settled in the living room, the bottle of wine already open on the coffee table. Conversation came easily, as it always did with him, but there was an undercurrent of something deeper, a tension neither of us seemed eager to name. At some point, the words stopped. He leaned closer, his hand brushing mine, and the room seemed to shrink around us. When he kissed me, it was slow and deliberate, a question asked and answered in the same breath. The night unfolded in a blur of emotions, hesitation, exhilaration, and the quiet surrender to something we both had tried to resist. By the time I left, the world outside felt sharper, more vibrant, as if I'd been walking in a dream and had only just woken up. But with that clarity came uncertainty. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about what this meant, for me, for John, for the life I'd worked so hard to build. I wasn't sure where this path would lead, but one thing was certain, I couldn't turn back now. Don't miss the next story. Subscribe to my channel Cheating with Lemons to ensure you never miss a new infidelity story. Stay tuned.